providing these briefings throughout the day today in terms of how the election is operating in the city of Milwaukee. Just a little reminder on the landscape for today. We would normally be operating 180 voting sites in the city of Milwaukee. Today we are operating 5. Those sites are Marshall High School, Riverside High School, Washington High School, Hamilton High School, and South Division High School. All of those sites opened on time this morning or within minutes of opening on time. All of them open sufficiently staffed. So we do have a very solid, experienced election worker staff at each of those locations. We also have at least 4 individuals from the Milwaukee Health Department at each of those locations to make sure that the personal protection equipment is being properly distributed to the election workers and that all precautions, including social distancing, are being adhered to at all times. We have members of law enforcement helping with traffic control, and we have approximately 30 members of the National Guard at each one of those locations. And I'm very happy to report that they have been phenomenal to work with and have really been well integrated into the operations of the voting sites and have played a very key role in terms of our ability to operate those sites. In total, between those 4 pools of individuals, we have somewhere between 80 to 100 individuals working in different capacities, some inside, some outside of the polling locations. I really want to commend those individuals. I believe they are the true heroes of the very unfortunate decision that occurred yesterday to move forward with this election. In particular, I want to recognize Health Commissioner Kwolek for the substantial investment of her staff, PPE, and other resources that she has made in trying to administer an election in a community gathering setting as safely as possible. And I know that the commissioner and her staff have been very dedicated to doing everything we can to keep our election workers safe and to keep the public safe. At this time, at least at 11 o'clock in the morning, we are very fortunate that the rain that was in today's forecast has not manifested itself, and we have beautiful blue skies today. Certainly that helps with voters who are waiting outside of the voting sites. I don't have numbers yet in terms of how many people have voted, but I can report that turnout has been robust. In fact, most of the sites are reporting anywhere from a 1.5 to a 2.5 hour wait time, with lines outside of those sites, maintaining social distancing. So people are placed 6 feet apart, and we do have election workers walking up and down the line, enforcing the social distancing, but those lines are extending for several blocks outside of the voting sites. It's unfortunate that wait time is so significant. This is nothing that I would have hoped for in the city of Milwaukee, but it's absolutely essential that we operate these sites in a manner that ensures safety. So there are limited numbers of people going into the building and going into the voting room throughout the course of the day today. I feel very positively that the process is flowing steadily through each one of the voting sites without any real significant delays once people are inside. I would say there are many injustices that are attached to this election. One that I think we will just be continuing to visit for months ahead and will unquestionably result in additional lawsuits and that is the status of the tens of thousands of voters in this city who were issued absentee ballots out of necessity and who have not, as of today, returned those absentee ballots. We have been fielding hundreds of calls from people who either did not receive an absentee ballot or are concerned whether their absentee ballot that they had dropped in the mail will be received by today's date. A couple things that I really want to emphasize to the public: as long as your ballot is postmarked by election day, it will be counted in the election. Or as long as you get your ballot to one of the drop-off sites in the city of Milwaukee, and that would be Mill Road Library, Washington Park Library, Bayview Library, Zablocki Library, or the Zeidler Building downtown, those drop-off locations will be open until 8 p.m. tonight. So again, as long as your ballot is postmarked by election day at a drop-off location by 8 p.m., it will be counted in the election. Where we have received a number of very concerning calls is from voters who have self-confined and never received their absentee ballot in the mail. By state law, and I know that there's been a lot out on social media about this, but by state law, we are not allowed to reissue a ballot after the Friday deadline to apply for that ballot. So we took dozens of calls today from voters saying, I never received my ballot in the mail. Can you email me my ballot? We are not allowed by state law to reissue an absentee ballot either by mail or by email. So if you are waiting for an absentee ballot and you did not receive it in today's mail, your only voting option is to go to a voting center to cast your ballot. I think this is a very sad situation for voters in the city of Milwaukee and across the state. We know that there are individuals, I've spoken to some of them today, who are lifetime voters, who have not missed an election in 35 or 40 or more years of voting. But because of the way this election was set up, because of the courts and the legislature's decision to move forward with the election, would have no other option today than to appear at their voting center to cast their ballots. And in terms of their risk and their health, they are having to decide to break their lifetime tradition of not missing an election and will not be casting ballots in this election. I think it's a very sad statement. We have moved forward with an election, but we have not moved forward with democracy in the state of Wisconsin. So that provides my overview. I know that the central count of absentee ballots is also in operation today. Significant volume, obviously very unlikely that they will finish processing absentee ballots. No election results, either from the polling places or from the processing of absentee ballots, will be released until April 13th. We've been instructed by the state simply to provide a count of ballots cast in today's election. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. I know there's quite a few here already. Looks like a question from Jeremy about vote totals. Just to be clear, the only thing that municipalities will be reporting today to the county and to the public is the numbers of ballots cast. No election results will be published anywhere in the state in any municipality until April 13th. We noticed the gap was wider between ballots requested and ballots sent out last week. What was the process like to close the gap? Well, I think municipalities across the state, if I understand this correctly, were struggling with the volume of absentee ballot requests that were coming in, processing all of those requests, and then sending out those absentee ballots. How did we close the gap? We involved more and more people into the data entry and ballot assembly processes. I would estimate that between people who were working from home, people who were working in different data entry centers that had been established in the city of Milwaukee, and our absentee ballot assemblers that were working at the warehouse, we had several hundred people engaged in getting out those ballots as quickly as possible. Obviously, the My Vote website and municipalities themselves are not equipped for the volume of absentee ballot requests that we were seeing. It did take us a time to play catch up, but I know as of that Friday deadline for requests for absentee ballots, we had fully caught up and were issuing our ballots. The challenge will really be with voters who submitted a request on Friday. It's very unlikely that they will even receive those ballots until the end of this week. So that's why the extension to the April 13th deadline was so critical. The Spanish Journal is asking the return of absentee ballots was extended. So the deadline for requesting an absentee ballot was last Friday. For about a 10-day period of time, the deadline for returning an absentee ballot had been extended from today's date until April 13th. Last night or late yesterday afternoon, the US Supreme Court overturned that extension and reestablished the April 7th deadline. So for a ballot to be counted in this election, it has to either be at a drop-off site today or it has to be in the mail with that April 7th postmark. A question about for somebody who has requested an absentee ballot but never received or returned that absentee ballot, they can still go to a voting center and cast their ballot today. If they did return their absentee ballot, if they dropped it in the mail, that is counted as having voted, and they cannot go to their voting center today. So the difference between the two is if you've never received your ballot or if you still have possession of it, you can go. If you dropped your ballot in the mail to be returned, you cannot go and then also vote today. With regard to the postmark, I think it's okay to take ballots to the post office. Just make sure you're arriving prior to the last pickup time. Don't drop off your ballot after the last pickup time for that post office. But I certainly think if you would like to eliminate the post office as a third party in the delivery of your ballot and you're concerned about your ballot being received, then I would definitely encourage individuals to think about dropping off at one of those ballot drop-off sites. Again, it's the 5 sites and they are open until 8 p.m. Previously, it had been 1 p.m. That is extended for today's election until 8 p.m. So there's a question regarding the why we were not able to open more polling locations with the support from the National Guard. We did not know until yesterday how many National Guard we would receive for supporting voting operations in the city of Milwaukee. That number could have been anywhere from 20 to the 250 that we requested. Ultimately, we ended up with somewhere around 170 members of the National Guard, but we did not have that number until mid-afternoon yesterday. So we had to move forward. We had to roll out and communicate with the public what these voting centers were going to be. Had we had that information sooner, I absolutely think it could have influenced the number of voting centers in the city of Milwaukee. And I just want to be clear, we had made a request to the Wisconsin Elections Commission several weeks ago regarding whether or not members of the National Guard would be available to municipalities in the state of Wisconsin, and we're told that that had been taken off the table and they would not be available, and then only found out by reading a media release over the weekend that these National Guard would in fact be available. I don't want that to be misinterpreted as being ungrateful. We are very grateful that they are here. However, the timing really did not allow us to maximize their presence and to think about the possibility of opening additional centers. To confirm, there are about 80 to 100 workers. There's just a confirmation on the number of election workers and the National Guard. We have between 80 to 100 election workers at each one of the voting centers. I don't have a clear sense around possible no-shows today. Those are numbers that I knew last night going into the election. And then on top of that, we have 30 National Guard members, approximately 30 at each of the voting centers. That may seem like a high number of people, but when you think about the operations that are occurring, the volume of people, the level and the volume of curbside voting that is occurring at each of these sites, and just walking up and down the lines of people and enforcing social distancing, every person is being put to use at each one of these sites. When and where will you be reporting the total number of rejected ballots? Will you distinguish between ballots rejected for not having witness signatures and those rejected for other reasons? When an absentee ballot is rejected during the processing, and ballots that are lacking witness signatures will be rejected unless there is some sort of remedy provided by the voter. Those are recorded, the reason for the rejection, at the central count processing of absentee ballots. And as part of our canvassing process and working with the county, I'm sure that we'll be able to break those numbers out. As of right now, I can identify that we have somewhere around 750 absentee ballots that are missing witness signatures. Question from Jason Calvi, and then I'm going to make that my last question because I do need to return to the election. When and where will you be reporting the total numbers? Oh, I believe I tackled that already. So if there's nothing else, Jody or Lexi, can you remind me what time our next briefing is?
3 o'clock and then 7.
I'm happy to rejoin the group at 3 o'clock and provide an update and answer any questions that you might have at that time. Thank you.